basically, conservatives would say, despite Franco's similar political style to Hitler, he just wanted Spain to stay out of trouble, and though of the country and thought of the country before himself. But others are willing to argue Franco would have played puppet on Hitler's hand if Hitler asked. In Hitler's hand if Hitler asked. Having Spain on his side, Hitler would have France surrounded, so there was a plus for Spain and Germany to work together. But he also used Spain as a testing ground for German military forces, and particularly his air force, which in 1937 bombed Guernica, the first time a European city was flattened by area bombing. There's probably a moderate reason compromising between right and left opinions of why Franco never fully submitted to being a part of the Axis powers. Relationships within Spain were also disrupted. The Basque people, a region of northern Spain which had always been somewhat treated as its own separate society, had been asking for autonomy for years, so they just wanted to be independent from Spain, basically. Even before Franco was put in power. Nationalistic aspirations of these people were threatening to Franco's authority, and therefore the overall nationalism of Spain. A country cannot be united when the North wants to break away. In order to stop the Basques, the Basque language was outlawed in 1959, along with their semi-autonomous councils and tax collecting system, important things, in order to weaken the rallies. In recent years, there's been a movement in Spain to dig up the dark secrets of the Franco dictatorship, but there's one atrocity that is only now coming to light, says Jerome Sokolovsky. Since Franco ruled with an oppressive thumb, other views and political opinions were not tolerated, for these were seen as threats to the dictator. No better way proved better than using fear to ensure suppressed revolts and forced support. Hitler kidnapped thousands of Aryan children, they being of dominant race, and therefore they needed a dominant education. Basically, he made all these kids miniature Nazis in the making. Franco did the same thing, minus the Aryan insanity. He kidnapped kids of parents whom did not support his policies and indoctrinated them in fascism. In his article on the dark secrets of Spanish fascism, Jerome Sokolovsky wrote about a man who had been one of these children. Yxenia Ablana, who's now 79, was one of the thousands of children stolen from leftist parents during the Franco era so that they could be indoctrinated in fascism and conservative Catholicism. Today, Ablana describes how his childhood was stolen from him, the trauma, the sexual abuse, and other horrors he and too many other children endured from kidnapping. And so, where is he? Where's our guy? That right there is Yxenia Ablana. And so, a primary source right here is Franco praising fascism. So, the end of one of his speeches here goes, "We do not work for the ephemeral means, but for a resplendent tomorrow. Our army has in it the flower of youth. Divine assistance clearly has shown itself to us. With it, nothing and nobody shall vanquish us. If we fought hard on our crusade, we would fight even harder if the new danger of new war should threaten us. We know that with us is life, without us death." So those were the concluding words to his speech to Phalangist Party Council praising German, Italian, and Spanish fascism. Basically that, in his opinion, without their mighty forms of government, the world would end. In the final years of his dictatorship, Spanish citizens remained under the watchful eye of the secret police and harsh fascist policies, first introduced when Franco came to power. Conservative politics and Catholic influence continued to lead society. As Franco got older, he died at the age of 82. The secret police became stricter, as did public safety, which is really safe when you're killing all your citizens, as the dictatorship was suspicious of being threatened. Well, the dictatorship was worried about being threatened as the leader's life was slowing down. The ETA, a leftist Basque terrorist group, formed after the suppression of Basque autonomy and was the biggest threat, and so further efforts were made to revoke Basque rights, only further provoking the anger of the left, who supported Basque independence. In block quote, in September 1975, Franco entered his final sickbed, and this was when a number of opponents of the regime, especially in France, were targeted by right-wing terror actions. So, right-wing terrorist groups were attacking left-wing terrorist groups. Good. The bookshop Magalde, for example, a center of Basque literature in Hendaye, was hit twice in April and May 1975. And this is just one example of precautionary reactions of the right. France, too, was bombed by Spanish forces, France being an opponent of communism during World War II and therefore an opponent of Spain, even though Spain never got involved with World War II, so go figure. November 20th, 1975 marked the date of Francisco Franco's death, and thus the death of the government. Dun 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 dun. What state would the country be in now? An immediate new dictatorship? A conservative provisional government? A leftist attempt to take control? Considered a historically remarkable event, Spain was able to transform from a dictatorial regime into a pluralistic parliamentary democracy without civil war, revolutionary overthrow, or defeat by a foreign power. So basically, they went from being in this sick and twisted dictatorship into democracy without any bloodshed. So good for them. Juan Carlos was now the king of Spain, which sounds like a step backwards, but it was he who helped Spain progress liberally. This was amazing considering Carlos's education was actually structured by Franco, and he had sworn loyalty to Franco, but he proved his loyalty to democratic government through his rule. So he and Franco were like this, but secretly he wanted to help the people be free of dictatorshipness. First, Carlos passed the allowance of 400 political prisoners' freedom. So he let all the people Franco had put in jail, he let them out, along with other political pardons. Carlos's agenda could be viewed as moderate, a viewpoint Spain was in dire need of after having been run by so many polar extremists, going from liberal to conservative to liberal to conservative, and now right down the middle. Yay. New political parties were formed, such as the Union of the Democratic Center, made up of Francoist reformists and moderate opposition Democrats. Finally, compromise was in reach. Even as reforms were passed and more leftists were safe to come out of hiding, controversies still remained from fascism. People were still living in poor conditions, the ETA was still active, and kidnapped children remained missing. To deal with unemployment, the parties of the left were promised an increase in unemployment benefits, the creation of new jobs, and other reforms. In return, they agreed to further tax increases, credit restrictions, reduction in public expenditures, and 20% ceiling on wages increase. Basically, people's wages were increased and public projects were introduced and everything was hunky dory and they all compromised. Yay. As for the ETA, which still exists today, they still posed a threat to public safety and welfare because they're a terrorist group, and bombings persisted despite government efforts to prevent these violent acts. In more recent times, the New York Times reported news that the ETA, on October 20th, 2011, the group declared a unilateral end to its campaign of bombings and shootings, saying it wished to seize an historical opportunity to reach a just and democratic resolution of the conflict. So basically, they'll stop being violent and they're going to try and find peaceful ways to get the autonomy that they want. Except, actually, France now has quite a bit of autonomy for the northern regions. Even though the northern regions are still a part of France, they're not entirely independent. But, I mean, now they're not being violent. So, yay. As for the missing children, many, like Yuxenia Ablana, have been recovered and documented, but they were orphaned as many leftist parents were killed. Leftist parents were killed under Franco's government, and only the survivors today can share their story, much like those who survived the concentration camps of Germany. Today, Spain continues to be governed by a secular constitutional monarchy, the country divided up among 17 autonomous communities and 2 autonomous cities, and thus they have their own governments that are supervised by the central government. So a bunch of little small governments, one big government. And universal male suffrage gives the right to all to have a say in their governmental leadership. There's universal male suffrage. Political parties range from extreme left to parties supporting the victims of the ETA crimes, but fair elections keep representation of all parties balanced. Socially, Spain has moved forward earlier than many of its neighbors, as in, like, worldly neighbors, because they weren't actually first in a lot of things, but they were further ahead and along than other people. Anyway, socially, Spain has moved forward earlier than many of its neighbors. Franco, like other fascists, outlawed many different groups of people based on their ethnic backgrounds and other characteristics like homosexuality. Following suit after the Netherlands and Belgium, Spain fully legalized gay marriage and adoption rights in 2005, a victory for the Socialist Party. Prime Minister Jose Luis Rodriguez announced, "We are expanding the opportunities for happiness of our neighbors, our colleagues, our friends, and our relatives. At the same time, we are building a more decent society," which sounds a lot happier than what Franco ever did. So, that's Spain today as compared to yesterday. And so, primary source number 1. Alright. That's the symbol of the ETA. This is a photograph that was taken in Mexico where a former member was found, and this was graffitied on a sidewalk. And then recently, this was a news report from BBC. It says, where is it? The Basque separatist group, ETA, says it has called a definitive cessation to its campaign of bombings and shootings. And yeah, so hope this isn't awful. But that's Francoist fascism, and